What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to talk kicker strategy and kicker rankings for the upcoming 2025 fantasy football season. In this video, I'm going to talk about how kickers are, although they are an important part of fantasy football, they are often overvalued. And in this video, I'm going to talk where you can find value late that may be better than reaching for Brandon Aubrey, as well as my general strategy about kickers and how you should employ them on your fantasy football team. If you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. I release a wide variety of fantasy football content to help you prepare for the 2025 draft season. I have quarterback strategy and rankings, tight end strategy and rankings that are already out from previous weeks, divisional previews. We'll have mock drafts starting next week, and we also have a defense strategy video coming out this weekend as well. So check all that out, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment because I reply to all my commenters. Don't have a very large channel, but if you reply and drop a comment, I will answer it. I love helping you guys out with your fantasy football questions, so please take advantage of that. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a link to the video that I made last year, which goes pretty thoroughly in depth of why I use a zero kicker strategy. So if you want to see more specifics of that, you can go to that channel. Just know that that specific video was from 2024, about a year ago. So some of the players and names will be a little bit different than the ones discussed in this video, namely Justin Tucker, because he's no longer in the league, at least not right now. But a lot of the concepts still are the same from what we saw in 2024 leading into 2025 for this upcoming season. So in general, if you go into that video, the general strategy that I talk about is that rather than reaching for a kicker early in the draft, you wait to get your kicker, because historically you are getting within the top 10 range of kickers, about half of them will be undrafted kickers. And in that video from 2023, 2022, and 2021, you saw that at least half of the top 10 rankings of the final standings of kicker points, half of them were undrafted. And as many as 9 of the 10 were undrafted in 2021. And by the way, when I mean undrafted, I'm talking about a 10-team league where you assume that 10 kickers are drafted, one for each team. And everybody that was outside the top 10 in terms of their projected rank and their ADP in the draft would be considered undrafted for the purposes of this video. And in this image that you can see here, the data that you see from 2024 season is very much the same as we've seen in historical trends in the past, in that kickers that go in the top 10, about half of them are undrafted. So you look at this list here, Chris Boswell, who was the #1 overall kicker on the season, he was actually had a pre-draft rank of number 18. So even if you were all the way into a 14-team league, for example, Chris Boswell may not have even gone off the board, and he ended up being the #1 kicker. So my point is that although Brandon Aubrey did give you good value with, again, this is the second season in a row where he's given you over 180 points from 2023 and 2024. But Chris Boswell was better value as somebody that was undrafted versus Brandon Aubrey, who was the kicker 3 this past draft season in 2024, but ultimately probably was reached for because Justin Tucker was reached for and then other guys followed suit. So it was better to get an undrafted kicker. And you just go through these names: Chase McLaughlin, Jason Sanders, Will Lutz, Jake Bates, Daniel Carlson. All of them were outside the top 10 in their pre-draft ADP in 2024, and they all finished inside the top 10. And in fact, Chase McLaughlin, as you see here, was actually the last ranked kicker in the NFL for his ADP heading into the 2024 season, and he finished top 5. So that alone should just tell you that this whole kicker situation is kind of a crapshoot in terms of projecting who the top kickers are. So there's going to be some kickers that show up that you did not expect to be drafting that are going to be top 10 performing kickers. So that's why for me personally, I like to wait and if possible, not draft a kicker at all, because I'm going to bet on the fact that I can find an undrafted talent that will give me good production at the kicker position, and then use the positions higher in the draft where your fellow league mates are going to be reaching for Brandon Aubrey, etc., to really fill up the depth of my flex players. To me, that is more important. And if you see in that video as well, I talked about a specific example that was kind of weird going back and looking back on, is that it actually kind of ended up being very predictive of the future, and that Christian McCaffrey was dealing with a Achilles injury at the time, and Jordan Mason was the handcuff for him. So in that video, I argued that it would actually be better to hold on to Jordan Mason versus a kicker, because if CMC does not play, then you're holding his handcuffed all the way up until week 1. And actually, this happened for me in a league that I play with family, is that I basically had CMC as my running back. I had Jordan Mason as the handcuff because that was a Monday night game. You didn't really know what was going to happen. And because of the situation, Jordan Mason I still held him rostered. I didn't know it was going to happen. And then we found out Monday, my plan was to basically, I was either going to play CMC if he plays, and then drop Jordan Mason to get Jake Moody, or if Jordan Mason plays, I'll just see what happens. And what I ended up doing in week 1 is I just didn't even play a kicker. And Jordan Mason actually ended up helping me win that week. So I'm sure that there's other crazy examples of things that happened from that week 1, but that's a specific example of how it actually can be more valuable to hold a handcuff running back versus a kicker. And if you set yourself up in a position where you are not needing to roster a kicker, especially in the very first week of the season, if you don't have to draft them, then you could find an underrated, undrafted gem that, in the case of, this season, could have been Chris Boswell, could have been Chase McLaughlin, etc. But by saving yourself that extra spot, you preserve a handcuff. So you wait until week 1 at the very last minute to pick up the kicker, and chances are it could be a kicker that very well could be a top 10 kicker. So the purpose of this graph here, as you could see, I'm going to go back to this 2024 stats. You see the rankings of all the kickers and the number of points they scored. And then in these columns here that I have the games listed over 20 points scored, the games that are over 10 points scored, and the games that less than 6 points are scored, which are kind of considered the bust games for kickers. So as you can see here, part of why Chris Boswell and Brandon Aubrey are the number 1 and 2 kicker from 2024 is that they had 2 games that were over 20 points in fantasy, and they were the only 2 kickers to have at least 2. In fact, there were only 6 kickers total that had a game in which they scored at least 20 points. Notice that one of them was not Justin Tucker. So Justin Tucker all the way there at the bottom, number 13, despite being the number 1 kicker off the board. Then you have games in which there was over 10 points scored. And Kaimi Fairbairn was actually had the most total games. And this also includes the games over 20 because it's still over 10. But he had 10 of his 17 games were over 10 of his 17 games were over 10 points. So it's a measure of consistency. And if you see, even for the number 1 kicker, Chris Boswell, he still had he only had 7 out of the 17 games in which he had over 10 points. So that's still another 10 games in which he gave you under 10 points, and 2 games in which he gave you under 6, which is, you give him and Aubrey credit, is that the 2 of them were both very effective and not bombing your week. And that's a big reason why they ranked as high as they did. You kind of go down to the bottom of this list where you get closer to the Justin Tucker, Jake Elliott, Josh Carty range. Now you have kind of the opposite, where about 6 or 7 out of those games are bust games. So the whole point of this data is that it shows you that at about roughly half of most of these kickers' games, anywhere from about a third to a half, they give you 10 plus points. The average amount of points that you can generally see on a week-to-week basis with these kickers is between 10 points and 6 points. So the purpose of this illustration is to show you that in general there are outlier games in which the kicker will score 20 points or 10 points. But what you want to see, though, is that in general, a lot of kickers can give you pretty similar production in terms of getting to that 10 to 6 point range. So as you kind of go into this range of Jake Bates on down, you have no kickers that scored at least 20 points. And as on average, the kickers that scored over 10 points, they did it only 7 games out of the season. They also had some bust games as well. So, and if you look at their total numbers, once you get from Jake Bates to Daniel Carlson, sorry, I blanked on his first name for a sec. So once you get to him, there's a significant drop off in points to about 130 to 126. And all these kickers in that middle range there are generally scoring on average between 10 to 6 points, as you could tell by this data here in terms of the number of games that they've had more than 10 or less than 6. So my point with this data is to basically show you that you can replicate a lot of this kicker production on the waiver wire. It doesn't have to be somebody that you draft highly. And that's part of why in my strategy, I do not draft a kicker very high. I usually let that be somebody else's decision to tank their depth in the flex by taking the number 1 kicker in the 6th or 7th round. All right, so now looking at this, we will go to my kicker rankings for 2025. And for a while, if you go back and you look at my video, I've talked about how Justin Tucker is always taken as kicker 1, but he generally does not live up to that hype. And especially this past season was not very good for him as he was outside the top 10. Brandon Aubrey is a little bit different of a story, though, in terms of I think he actually can give you pretty good production that may make the pick worth it. In terms of, he has scored at least 180 points in his past 2 seasons in which he was primarily the starting kicker and was a top 2 kicker in the league for the past 2 seasons. So going at kicker 1 now, I think that that's an appropriate ranking of him, and I think that he could return value as the number 1 kicker. What I don't think he will return value on is the fact that he will be reached at a point where he should not be. There are going to be managers in your fantasy football leagues, and ignore the average round because this is just based on the consensus ranking of players that the experts put out. But I'm telling you, when you do actual league drafts, there's going to be people taking Brandon Aubrey in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th round, in which he probably should be going closer to the 12th round, to be honest with you, at this highest. But because he is going to be reached for, I'm personally going to let that be somebody else's bomb that they throw themselves on. And I don't mean that in terms of he will have a bad season. I just more mean in the fact that the range that he's going is going to be valuable flex players that I would rather have the depth of my running backs or wide receivers that really could give you the elite bang for your buck in fantasy football versus a kicker where you could also get, in the case of last year, Chris Boswell, who gave you similar production of Brandon Aubrey, but somebody that was undrafted. The next tier I have here are kickers that I believe will have good seasons, but again will probably not be kickers that I will be drafting for similar reason as Justin Tucker. But I do think you kind of can get some better value with them if they do fall into an appropriate range. I just don't really think that they will, just knowing how fantasy football drafts work and people's obsession with kickers that are a little bit misguided in my opinion. So number 2, I have Cameron Dicker. Then I have Chris Boswell. Then I have Jake Bates. Then I have Kaimi Fairbairn. I thought it was really interesting why ESPN had Jake Bates as number 1 over Brandon Aubrey. To me, that just kind of did not make any sense because Jake Bates had a stretch in October, November last year where he was pretty consistent, but his overall numbers other than that are not really anything special. But for me, what I rank these 4 kickers are here is, 1, in terms of the offensive potential. If this, I think this team has a good offense that is going to be scoring a lot. But then also, will this team be kicking field goals more or scoring touchdowns? And that kind of dropped Jake Bates for me for a little bit on this list, is that Detroit gets a lot of touchdowns. Really didn't set him up to kick a lot of field goals. So I just kind of don't really see him having as much value as Cameron Dicker. So I put Cameron Dicker a little bit higher because I think that in general the offense still kind of has some question marks in terms of, is Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton reliable running backs that can score the ball consistently. I know we all love Hampton, but he's still got to prove it. I like Dicker as somebody that's going to be getting field goals in general, then Chris Boswell, and then I like the two ones coming up next. Fairbairn, I think, is a very consistent kicker, and he's been good for quite a while for fantasy. But I just don't think this Texans offense has the upside of those other teams to potentially set him up for as many field goals as those teams listed above him. This next tier of guys are guys that are so. I personally, what I've done is I've done these kicker rankings by taking the top 10 ADP and separating them out, because those are the ones that I'm projecting will be drafted. I'm going to focus more on the guys on the bottom 11 and down where I think they're a better value. But basically, Chase McLaughlin through Tyler Bass, I would be bypassing those guys. I would not be trying to draft them. I do think that, McLaughlin and Butker do give you some pretty good value, that if you're getting them in the last round, maybe that might be worth it. But guys like Jason Sanders, Jake Elliott, Tyler Bass, those guys have a lot of question marks to me. Jason Sanders, just the team success. Jake Elliott, he's just in general not been a very good kicker, despite that he continually gets ranked very high. And then Tyler Bass is dealing with a groin pelvis injury in which he may not even be ready week 1. But the kickers I really like, and this is where I think you really get your bang for your buck, is 11 on down. The kicker that I love the most, who is undrafted in a lot of leagues, Sleeper does not even have him ranked in their top 15. Matt Gay for the Washington Commanders. And the reason I say this is that he was still last year the number 11 kicker with Indianapolis, despite their issues that they had the season prior. And Matt Gay, to me, I think has potential to jump into the top 5 with the Washington offense that is going to set him up for field goals for 1. And then 2, they have some question marks of their own in terms of, how efficient can they be in terms of, they were very successful last year at, converting in short yardage situations. Maybe that might kind of regress back towards more field goal attempts. But you look at the Washington kickers, Austin Seibert and Zane Gonzalez, they had very good stretches last season in which they were definitely must-start kickers at certain points this season. And I think Matt Gay, who definitely has a better pedigree than both of those guys on the Washington kicking situation last year, I think that he will be set up for success. And if he is going undrafted, this is the number 1 kicker that I'm going to be looking at to try to make sure that I figure out a way to get him on my team. But I would ideally be trying to wait until a couple days before the season starts, because you probably have a handcuff that I think would ultimately be more valuable than having Matt Gay. Like, if you have a similar CMC Jordan Mason situation like I talked about earlier, I probably would continue to hold on to Jordan Mason, but I do think that Matt Gay of the undrafted kickers is the best option that you could take, that I definitely see jumping into the top 10 based on historical trends. Next, we have Will Lutz of Denver. And again, Will Lutz was another top 10 kicker last year whose consensus rank is only number 11. So I do think that this is a fair assumption that he can jump back into it. This is a good offense. The Broncos are also playing at elevation, which helps them get longer field goals. I think Will Lutz is good value, especially if he's undrafted, as somebody that you can pick up. And they're playing Tennessee week 1, which should be a blowout. Next is Daniel Carlson. I keep wanting to say Anders Carlson, which is his brother. I'm pretty sure he's not on a roster right now, though. But Daniel Carlson has been a pretty good kicker, all things considered, as a guy that does not get drafted generally or is on the fringes of rosters but can still be reliable. And I think this season, I'm a little surprised they only rank him as the consensus 17, because this offense is better in my opinion. And he's still been pretty good. He was a top 10 kicker last year. Good value, again, that you can get undrafted, and somebody that you don't need to draft a kicker and you can pick up later. Younghoe Koo, I like him. I think that, he's got a good leg for quite a while. I think this Atlanta offense is a little bit better. You like to see some accuracy improve with him, but I do think he has a potential for a bounce-back season. This year, he was projected to be undrafted. Tyler Loop of Baltimore is an interesting rookie that could be, he's on a great offense. He's somebody that is also going undrafted, and I think it might be worth trying to see what kind of chance you could take if it's not costing you a draft pick. And then a name that I really like that isn't brought up on the boards at all is Chad Ryland of the Arizona Cardinals. He is the consensus 29 kicker on ESPN, and I think this is a potential Chase McLaughlin sleeper here from last season, where you look at this Arizona team, they have a decent enough offense with Kyler, Trey McBride, MHJ, etc., that I think they will be able to get into scoring position. But with James Conner as the running back, and Kyler has not always been the most accurate in the red zone, I think there's potential that they settle for a lot of field goals. Again, another dome team. I think that this is a potential sleeper that I can definitely see being one of those names that again goes into the top 10. He's not getting drafted at all. This is a good player to take a flyer on, in my opinion. So this next tier of guys are guys that, that first group are all the people that I think have potential to be the names that jump into the top 10 this season. These are more deeper sleepers to potentially get there that I don't really like as much. I probably would not be trying to go out of my way to sign them, but they could be useful in certain matchups. Will Reichert, Evan McPherson, Brandon McManus, and Cam Little. I think the fantasy community is starting to realize that Evan McPherson is not a top 10 kicker, so he's dropped his ADP a little bit, but I honestly don't think that they've hit him enough, because he was just not a good kicker last season, and I have him as my number 18. Will Reichert, it kind of depends on how good that offense is, but I can't really put him higher than that in my opinion. And then Brandon McManus is going kind of high, but I don't really like his value, especially he wasn't really that great for fantasy last season. I don't really see him becoming like a, Mason Crosby type kicker for them, or I don't know why they have him that high, but I don't think that's a great selection for him at consensus 15. And then Cam Little is another name that I want to throw out there too. If Liam Cohen can get this Jags offense humming, especially now they have Travis Hunter, I think that this is a potential sleeper as well that could get into the top 10. Cam Little of Jacksonville. And this is kind of, their running back situation is not the best in terms of you got three different guys that are all kind of competing for touches. So I could very well see a situation where because of the passing game, they can get down into the red zone, but then they have struggles finishing off with that running back crew. That could set up Cam Little for some field goals there. That could make him valuable. And then the next four kickers are names that can be relevant, but I personally just don't have the confidence in to rank much higher than this. Jason Myers, that's an underrated name as well that could be added to the sleeper list, but you kind of know what you're getting with him. I think he's an okay streamer in certain matchups, though. Cairo Santos with Chicago, because of that offensive potential, if they can kind of get things going, I think that could be good value too. Jake Moody, I just don't trust. Did not play well last season. And then Josh Carty, a lot of question marks with this Rams offense, especially now with Stafford getting epidurals and stuff like that for herniated disc. And then I just put Justin Tucker here at the bottom. This to me was crazy. If you look at the ESPN ranking, they have Justin Tucker as the number 18 kicker on the board. And then they have Daniel Carlson at number 19. Daniel Carlson was a top 10 kicker last season, and he's going to play probably the whole season if he stays healthy. Justin Tucker, on the other hand, though, he's suspended for the first 10 games of the season. Why does ESPN think that he would be a better consensus ranking than a kicker who's been in the top 10 a couple times and actually has the starting job on a team that should be a better offense than last season? That to me just makes absolutely no sense at all. I really just wonder what goes on in ESPN sometimes with stuff like this. But that was just an absolute travesty. I just want to put that out there as my last parting shot to Justin Tucker and why he's consistently been one of the most overrated players in fantasy throughout the year. Well, throughout the years, not just singular year. It's been a long time, but it's just baffling to me to just see him on that ranking. Do not buy into the. I'm telling you, this guy is not going to play this season. There's just he had decline in his play. You have all the legal stuff going on. There is no way that he's going to get signed by a team. I feel like that's a pretty strong possibility that's going to happen. All right. Well, that's all that I've got for kicker strategy. So if you like this video, please subscribe. Drop a comment if you have any questions below. And hope to see you guys next time. Hope you guys have a great weekend too. And check out the next video. Bye.